Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah Show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 1-855-450-6624. Send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah Show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Evans. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. Is it warm up there for you?
It is.
It's warm down here.
For the Dakotas, I'd say we're doing all right. So I got a question for you, Steve. How do you determine how you're going to upgrade your graphics card?
Stick my finger in the wind and just figure out whether it's the right time or not, I suppose.
So you and I are kind of in the same boat insofar as I think you and I put an equivalent life value on graphics card. That is to say, if you didn't upgrade your graphics card in 10 years, you'd probably survive just fine. And like you, I'm cut from the same cloth insofar as if I didn't upgrade my graphics card for the next 10 years, I think I would roll over to year number 11 and I would feel like I'm just fine. In fact, to that point, the last desktop that I built was before, gosh, it would have been 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. I mean, it was a long, long time ago, and it never stopped working. I outgrew it, and by outgrew it, I mean I got better computers, and so I did a hand-me-down to my kid, and so it's still in use with its original graphics card, works just fine. And so if I had to go back to using that computer tomorrow, I don't think I would struggle with that at all. And yet you found yourself on Newegg this week watching for graphics card and then selling your graphics card in what can only be described as like an auction style knockout. Talk to me about that. What were you doing on Newegg?
Well, so I banked a lot of hours through overtime. Like I basically got up, stood at my desk, and went to sleep at night. Like it was a pretty brutal march from the perspective of the number of hours that I put in. My wife was just like, why don't you just do something nice and get a graphics card or something like that? Because it, every once in a while I like to play a video game. It's just I haven't had time. And I kind of said, well, that's nice, but when am I going to find time to use it? Because all I'm doing is working. Because other than the fact I just turn on the computer and it uses the graphics card because it has to, I haven't had a whole lot of time to put any kind of oomph behind it. But it's been 6 years or more since I bought a graphics card, and that tends to be about my cycle, maybe. Sounds like I'm a little more frequent than you, Noah, but not by leaps and bounds. I'm definitely not every generation.
Oh my gosh, ladies, TI came out, I've got to get it. Arg! That's not you.
Not quite. I definitely upgrade CPUs more frequently than GPUs. But so anyways, I was hitting refresh. I had a page open kind of constantly. And last week I almost got a 5060 Ti with the 16 gigs of RAM. And by almost, I mean, I put it in the cart. And as I'm clicking through, I got we're sorry, we no longer have this item pop up. Sigh. So I ended up getting one today, and I turned around and I sold my 2016 Quadro P6000 video card. I put it up on eBay for $525, and it sold in 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, I got the email saying, hey, you've listed it, and then I got another ding. I was like, oh, did they send me another repeat, or did I forget to do something? Nope, it was sold.
So what do you think the drive? I mean, I know that the answer, before I even ask the question, before it even leaves my lips, Steve, I know that the answer is going to be, well, it's a combination of those things, Noah. But what do you think is driving the cost of graphics cards up? Is it the fact that we're on the back end of this pandemic thing, and all of a sudden we just shut manufacturing down? Is it a function of tariffs? Is it a little bit of all of the above? Is it the drive of AI that everybody wants to do graphic processing now? I mean, what is the cause of why are graphics cards going so berserk?
I think the primary driver is AI, honestly. I don't think it has anything to do with the pandemic, because we saw, like, even going back a couple of months, well, let's say 6 or 7 months, we saw a drop in prices where I wouldn't call them reasonable, but by now standards, they're reasonable. So like a graphics card that came out 5 or 6 years ago, a couple of months ago, let's say 6 months ago, was maybe $600, and now they're hovering around $900 to $1,000. So we've seen a spike up again. And I think every time that we see I'm not going to say a breakthrough, I think that's too strong, but we see a long fashion. So the reasoning models just went bonkers this year. So like DeepSeek and others came to the forefront, and then we've gotten some better AI videos and stuff like that. And so every time that people see this succeeding commercially, then there's a surge to either run them locally or for hobbyists to go and take a look to see what it is that the big hubbub is about. And largely then they're interested in more RAM on the video card as opposed to faster, which is why I suppose my almost 10-year-old card sold so quickly.
So as we were taking a stroll down graphics card lane, you mentioned the flowers, and then we walked right past them. I want to go back to the flowers for a second. You talked to me about the overtime / the amount of work that you were putting in. How does that resonate with you? You strike me as a person that very much values balance and very much values the ability to unplug from work. So that comment catches my attention. Was that an ask for you, or was that no, I was happy to do it because I was nerding out and it was fun? I mean, where did that rank in Steve's world?
No, this project has been very demanding from the beginning, but it got to the point where this was the time they decided to make an exception and give us overtime. So as a salaried employee, as you can imagine, there really isn't a concept of overtime. It's you do the job. Mm-hmm. And with the understanding is like, well, some weeks are going to be lighter. The employer is obviously banking on the fact that those some weeks that are going to be lighter are going to be far, far fewer than the weeks that are going to be heavier, right? That's just how the equation goes. Mm-hmm. But the demand of this project was getting so great that they decided to make a one-time exception for the large volume of work we had to put in, and it had to get done. So wasn't something I wanted to do. On the flip side, when I was kind of thinking about it, I was thinking, well, you know, if I needed to pick up extra money like some people do and do odd jobs, this odd job is paying me a lot more than the odd jobs that I might pick up in my community. So, you know, I can burst for a little while, and so I did, and things have become a little more sane this month.
Yeah, so let's talk about bursting for a little while. I'm going to throw something at you that I'm playing with in my head, and I want to see if it lands with you. If you say, "Oh, that's cold water," you abandon base. So, prior to you and I getting to know each other on a deeper friendship level, one of the first recommendations you ever made to me was the recommendation to unplug. And I got to be honest with you. When it first left your mouth, I thought you were a little crazy. In part because I've told myself for years, my life doesn't work that way, right? Like if I worked an 8 to 5 and I got fine, right? But guess what? Servers don't break between 8 and 5. Much as I would like them to, much as I can plan it to, much as, that's just not how my life works. OBT dubs, small company, right? We got 6-7 people that work for us. And so I'm always going to be the line of last resort. So I've just told myself for decades, my life just doesn't work like that. And you were the first person to come along to say, really? You can still make a choice and do that differently. And it wasn't until I had some difficult decisions with my kids to where I was going to make a decision. Either I'm going to be the guy that always says yes, I'm always going to pick up the phone, I'm always going to be there to help you, or I'm going to go attend my kindergartner's band concert. And it turns out when you push me, I'm going to go to the kids' band concert. I'm going to hang up on you if you can't accept no for an answer, and then we'll talk about why that is a no later if you want to have that conversation. And if you don't want to have that conversation, turns out there's other people that do. So it's actually really worked out in my favor. It's maybe one of the most impactful piece of advice that anybody has ever given me. So I want to start by prefacing that. It was very helpful, and I very much appreciate it. In my current season of life, I'm trying to embrace this concept that I think as leaders mature, they can handle busier seasons. And so I think immature leaders or people that are, new in their career, those sorts of things, I think we struggle with that a little bit in part because, and I see this a lot in like the 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds, right? It's like we are almost allergic to work before 8 o'clock in the morning. And it's like we are almost allergic to work after 5 o'clock at night. And I think is the opposite end of the spectrum. I don't think that's healthy either. I would agree that, people like myself or people from my ilk, that it's like we work all day long and then we get done and we go home, we find projects at home, we work until 3 a.m. because it's just how I'm built. I want to be doing stuff. And I've learned how to, I won't say control that, but I've learned how to exercise that with intentionality. So yeah, I'm still doing projects. I'm just going to intentionally carve out some time for the things that maybe aren't as quote unquote important or as high of priority. But I'm trying to embrace this idea recently that high intensity seasons happen. They're okay. And so if I get hours off at times, not days off or not weeks off, that's okay too, as long as you have the ability to see down the road and trust that that high intensity isn't a permanent thing. It's a temporary thing. It's a place, it's a bridge to get from point A to point B. And I think framed in that light, high intensity seasons can be very productive. I think it gives you a tremendous amount of reward. At least I find myself getting a tremendous amount of reward after putting them in. I don't get back from Linux Fest Northwest, for example, where it's go, go, go from the time. I mean, there's something going on every hour of the day. I don't really find myself getting to the end of that and going, oh, I'm exhausted. I can't do. In fact, almost the opposite. I feel almost kind of recharged, almost like I'm ready to go, tackle life again, because I get introduced to different people and different projects and different nerd things. And so I'm interested coming out of a high intensity season. If you reflect backwards and look at that and say, yeah, there's an appropriate, healthy place for me to do that, for me to just bust it for a little bit. It puts a little bit of extra pennies in the piggy bank, and that allows me to buy new graphics cards. But also, I'm sure you got a lot of work done working long days.
Well, I suppose, but on the scale of eternity, am I going to get to the end of my days and think, if I only had a couple more days, I would have done this and this for my employer?
It's funny you say that. I had this conversation with somebody who works at Altispeed literally last week. We sat down and I was like, listen, if the choice comes between doing X and work, I promise you're not going to get to your deathbed and look back and be like, if only I would have had like another 4 access points. I could have, it just doesn't work like that's not the thing. People look back and like, hey, I could have gotten a few more machines reloaded if I'd have just said no one ever, right? So I think it's important, I think, to frame what we do and how we do it. But I don't know. As I look back, I would say, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, maybe I was too much on the intense side, and I took a period to kind of dial that back. And I guess I don't think all the time it's for me. I think I need a period of busy. I need a period or a season of, I want to go get at it. I want to go do a thing. In part because it keeps me involved and keeps me, it's the way I'm programmed. It's just the way I like to do. I don't like passive hobbies, right? So I prefer water skiing over tubing. That's not anything against people that are tubing. It's just, it's much easier to hold on to some handles while the guy at the boat drives you around than it is to balance yourself, get up on skis, that sort of thing. And I know there's some tuber out there that's like, well, you've never been pulled by my dad. He could not. I got it. I understand that. I'm just saying, in the grand scheme of things, there's maybe a bit more skill and intentionality involved in some other water sports, and so I prefer those. If I sit down and watch TV, I'm not really a veg out and watch one season after the other kind of guy. I am either doing something else while I'm watching TV, and if I'm going to concentrate on TV, it has to be at a minimum based on a true story, preferably some sort of documentary style. Those are my favorite. I like learning things and exploring topics that I otherwise wouldn't be able to explore. So I don't know. I not a huge
That's
thing.
Just because you're doing TV wrong. You have to sit with somebody and try and work out what's going to happen in the show before it happens.
You know what? You and I have talked about this, and here's what we're going to do now. Now we're going to fight, you and I, because you talk during movies, and you say that you would...
No, not in the theater. Not in the theater. Only at home.
Okay, Steve, when's the last time you've been to a movie theater?
Oh, last year at some point.
Okay. So it's not a frequent occurrence to you, and more often you watch them in your house where you talk during the movie.
We discuss what's happening. It is a way to engage between us. Although if we have company, we don't do that in front of company. It's just when Rosanna and I are together, that's just what we do.
Okay, that's allowed. That's fine. I did the caveat to the company thing wasn't previously made aware. I was not aware of that. So that
Have
changed.
you ever heard us do that?
No, but I don't know that we've ever watched a movie together, Steve.
I suppose not.
I'll grab the
Can't nail
popcorn.
you
We'll
down
cut
long
it.
enough.
Yeah, exactly. But no, to your point though, there is some there. So I think, much as I'm jabbing at you a little bit, there is value in the concept of if it's a shared experience, right? That's the value in watching the movie together, not necessarily the movie, right? It gives you that shared experience so that you and Roseanne have something to talk about, and less about I got through the movie and there happened to be, the person standing next to me. It's less about that, and it's more about that shared experience. So I kind of like that.
I wish I had a bell. I would be dinging the bell on that. There you go.
You can get the little actual desk one too. That's a thing that people have. Use that. Sleuth in the chat room says, I do that. Noah's chill, more common than you think. Here's the thing. I think it depends on how you're doing it, right? I think that if you're getting into like the cinematic experience, I think that talking during movies can be really problematic. I think if you're going more on the light, if you're going more from the standpoint of a shared experience, you want something to do together so that you have something to talk about, then I think it makes all the sense in the world. I just think it kind of depends on how you approach it a little bit. So this week, I embarked on a solar project. Here was the problem. The problem was there's a playground that exists for a daycare. And they wanted to have cameras on the playground so that they can see if the kids get hurt or if there's some nefarious individual that's walking around, all the reasons that you would want to have surveillance on a playground. The problem, the nearest building structures that have power and network to them are at minimum 300 feet away, some of them more. Also OBT dubs. You've got to get high in order to get over the playground equipment to see things, which further complicates things. So we started down the path of putting cameras so you had something along the building. And it was better than nothing, but like by the time you get into the playground equipment itself, it's almost like taking a postage stamp and trying to stretch it over a 1080p display. It just doesn't work very well. It's all pixelated. And the biggest problem that I just couldn't get past was there are two buildings that surround the playground. So I had two angles for which I can see. The problem is the playground equipment itself blocks the view from the other what would be two angles, right? So you can't see those other two sides. Turns out that's where most of the kids are playing because that's where it's a long story. But basically that's where a lot of the kids spend their time. So it's a huge problem. So what to do? We looked at a number of different options. One option is you can rent a ditch witch, which if you're not familiar with that, it's a trenching machine. Essentially what it does, almost think of it like a chainsaw that sticks in the ground and cuts a groove in the ground, and then you lay your cable down in the groove, and oftentimes if you get a nice trencher, it will do that for you. Then you backfill it with dirt, and then you've got a cable in the ground. I've done that. It works. There are a number of problems. Problem number one, it's very expensive. It's an incredibly laborious process to do that. You're out there. It's going to take a while. The second thing is, in this area, there was a gentleman who recently lost his arm because he called the power company. He did all of the things that he was supposed to do, but they didn't flag it correctly. And so he cut into an underground power wire and lost his arm. So there is absolutely a danger anytime you go digging into the unknown. So that's a problem. Problem number three, having done it a number of different ways, I will tell you, is it more work to bury conduit and then fish a wire through it? Yes, it is. Is it absolutely worth every second extra that you will spend to bury conduit so that you fish a wire through so that when the cable goes bad, not if, when something goes wrong, you have the ability to fish a new one without having to retrench a new wire as opposed to just burying the wire? Absolutely. In fact, my most egregious example of a trenched wire that went awry, it was trenched, it was good, it was fine, everything worked until it wasn't. And what happened was, and again, this might be something specific to Steve and I's area of the country, water comes down, water freezes because we live in the tundra. What happens when water expands, when it freezes, what happens to it? It expands, that pushes everything away. If that ice forms underneath the wire, it's pushing the water or the cable up. And so over time, that cable just works its way up until it popped through the surface and a lawnmower whacked it. And that was the end of the link from one building to the other. And again, if it's not in conduit and first of all, the conduit would have protected it. I also think the conduit would have had the rigidity to prevent itself from being frost heaved up, but I digress. You have to retrench the entire wire. So for all of the above mentioned reasons, I don't like to do it that way. And if I was going to do it, I would go through the extra effort to trench a wire. So the next thing was, can you pay somebody to hang it across utility poles? Well, it turns out local municipalities aren't real cool with attaching things to their poles, particularly if it's private things. So now you're putting in your own infrastructure essentially. Again, been down that road, have one of those shirts too. What happens if you attach it to the thing? They'll make you buy the post, and then in the case what we did, we attached it to a post, and the city came put one right next to a new post right next to it, and then the other one became our post. And A, it looked ridiculous. B, there was no benefit in it because they were anyway. All that to say, it wasn't a great option either. So after considering all of the available options, the best thing that I could come up with was there is a shed that is absolutely perfectly positioned to capture exactly where all the little children are playing on the playground. It's ideal, except for two very big roadblocks. Roadblock number 1, there is no power to that shed. Roadblock number 2, there is no networking to that shed. Those two components end up being very important when the purpose of the camera system is to provide power to the camera and then send a video feed via the network back to the NVR. Turns out you can't do either of those things if you don't have power or network. So we embarked on a multi-week research and development and construction project to try to build a little mini solar array that could power a remotely operated camera. And the end result I was really, really happy with. It kind of looked like this. So to start, we needed a solar panel. Now, you can get panels from all manner of places, and we'll have some links for you in the show notes on where you can buy some of this stuff. I have two friends that do a lot of solar things. One is Jeff, who has made an appearance on this program more than once, and he uses a site called Green Tech Renewables where you can just buy the raw panels. So I think the manufacturer that he was looking at was REC, or the manufacturer that he had that he's referenced in the past is REC. So I'll have a link for you there. But if you're ever doing any sort of project with any sort of size or scale, you're best to buy the raw panels. We didn't go that route for a number of reasons, most of which are beyond the scope of our discussion tonight. But if you want to buy the raw panels, we'll put the link there. We went with a Renogy panel. And so now we've got solar coming in, but there's a problem. And the problem is that the sun isn't always out. And of course, you want to power the camera anytime, all the time, even during the night. And so for that, we added a battery. Now I'll have the link for the battery listed in the show notes, but during our pre-show discussion, it was brought to my attention that really the better battery to go is from a company called Lytime. And this was, it was suggested to me first, I think, by Jeff, and then later was reiterated by one of the producers of this program before the show. And so I'll link you to Lytime for their lithium Life Pro battery, and you can take a look at either of those. Things that we were looking for thermal protection, so it'll shut down, won't charge. You don't want thermal runaway because, anytime you're dealing with lithium, you can have a really bad day. And if you want any evidence of that, just pay attention to the boarding when you're going onto an airplane. They're going to tell you, pull all the lithium-ion batteries out. If you notice, there's an increased level of sales of suitcases in the airport. Why? Because people are showing up with these smart suitcases that have automatic rollers, wheels, and such on. And if you need to check your bag and you don't have a suitcase that you can remove the lithium-ion battery for, they won't let you put that underneath the airplane cabin. So for a variety of reasons, you want to be exceptionally careful anytime you're dealing with lithium batteries. They can have a bad day. I would highly encourage you, whether or not you're interested in solar, whether or not you're interested in any of this, I would highly encourage you to go to YouTube and look up a video on what happens when you puncture a lithium-ion battery. It'll be an enlightening experience for you, pun intended. So we've got energy coming in. You can't just plug the panel directly into the battery. Indeed, you need something that's going to take the varied voltage that comes in from the PV panel and turn it into a consistent charge that can charge a lithium battery. And so for that, you need a charge controller. Now, there's a variety of charge controllers to go with. We chose the Unify Solar Point, and I would tell you that under the absolute right circumstances, the Unify Solar Point is a really awesome device. But like anything, it suffers from what I call spork syndrome. Spork syndrome is the following. If you take a spork, is it a good fork? Not really. Is it a good spoon? Not really. But it's a fork and a spoon all in one. Hey, the Solar Point follows kind of the same logic. If you want and or need everything to be in one package, the Solar Point does it all. In theory, it is a PV panel charge controller, and so it'll connect to the PV panel. It will charge the battery. It can balance between what's coming in via solar, via what's in the battery. It has a Wi-Fi access point for you to connect to, and it's got a built-in Ethernet switch that provides PoE passive 24 volt to the devices. In practice, I find, again, it suffers from spork syndrome. There are a number of problems. So the first problem is, we're going to dig into this a little bit more. You can't really get at the metrics, right? You can log into the thing over its web UI, again, when it's working, and then you can see them there. But there's no way that I could find to easily get at it to tie it to Prometheus or Home Assistant or Victoriametrics or anything else, so that, like Steve is doing with his Enphase, he keeps an eye on how much energy they're pulling in, how much energy they're spending. He keeps track of that as compared to what devices are in use. I mean, he's able to correlate all of these things. That would be a manual process with the Solar Point. You'd have to log into the web UI. You'd have to click into their little thing. You'd have to look and see, well, this is how much solar came in. This is how much came out. And then you'd have to pull all that information out by hand and put it somewhere else. So not real ideal from that standpoint. The second thing, and the thing that brought the project kind of to a halt, was the built-in switch is abysmal. It worked to begin with, and so we started out pretty good. But very early on, Reed, before we could even really get everything situated and configured, there were just inconsistent behaviors. And at first, the most obvious thing that we thought was the nanobeams. They're the wireless link, right? They're the thing that you would think would be the potential problem. And it was further confusing because I couldn't ping the nanobeam itself. And so it started making me think, well, geez, maybe one of these nanobeams is bad. So the troubleshooting process that I went through, which, again, if you were doing this from scratch, I would advise you to maybe do it this way to begin with. I took everything down and laid it out on the ground. And I started with every individual component. So does the nanobeam talk to this nanobeam? Yes. Okay, check. Do we get network on that side? Yes. Check. Now I'm doing this with an external power source. And as I'm working my way through, eventually I get to, okay, I've got the camera working. I've got the camera working through a nanobeam. I've got the camera working through a nanobeam with a switch providing PoE. Now let's see if we can pull this off of this switch or pass it. So the only thing this switch is needing to do at this point, it's not even doing PoE. It's literally just passing network traffic between two network jacks, and it's not doing that consistently. It'll do it for a little bit. The pings will drop. Various different things, but in large part, it's not working. Now, you're listening to this and you're like, well, no, you got a bad Solar Point, or you got a good one, and by the time you were done installing it, you shorted it, you drooled on it. What? I don't know. Something happened. But all that to say, again, if you separate out when you're building systems, and I'm trying to incorporate these lessons as I go through to do my Home Assistant build in my house. I'm reworking that, and I'm trying to learn from all of these things. The more I look into it and the more I dig into it, a really good general engineering practice is everything has its own little domain and does its own little thing. You want a good network switch, get a good network switch. You want a good solar controller, get a good solar controller. You want a good charge, you want a good battery, and everything has its own separate thing. Here's the monkey wrench that comes into solar. When you're dealing with solar, every single last watt counts. So that's why I started by saying, under the right circumstances, this is a device made in heaven. Because if you're mounting a panel atop a pole and you are going to plug one or two devices into said panel and or into said solar setup, really the Solar Point does it all. And so presumably if ordered directly from Unify and, either didn't run into the problem that I had or didn't have the damage I had or whatever it is that I've still not really come to the conclusion as to what specifically is wrong with the solar point. If you can get around those things, it's kind of an ideal solution. The problem that you run into is if one thing goes or one thing begins to fail, the rest of the dominoes kind of topple out. And so there are some things like, for example, you can't shut off DHCP. So if you have the solar point running, it is going to hand out DHCP addresses of its own liking to whatever clients are connected to Wi-Fi, and there's not a darn thing in the world you can do about it. That, again, you're talking about a camera, a thing that's sitting out on a pole somewhere, and it isn't tied to anything else, or it's just running out. That's probably great. That's probably fine. If it has an IP and two things can talk, hey, Bob's your uncle, right? In my case, none of that works because it is hanging off of a very large network. It's hanging off of a very large camera system. It's hanging off of an existing IP scheme. So there's all manner of network configuration that I can't, and nor do I want to change. I want to keep everything in the standard. Literally all I want is this camera to hang off of a wireless bridge out in this shed. The last thing is the nano beams. So we went with two 5AC nano beams. And here's the thing that I would tell you about the nano beams. The first wireless building-to-building system I installed was made by 3Com, and each side was $1,500. So it was $3,000 just for the radio set. And all that did, and I want to say that was back, I think it was 10. I think it was 10 megs is what you got over the wireless link, 3Com building-to-building. That didn't include the switching, that didn't include the router, that didn't include anything on either side. That was just the link. That set of nano beams, which I have running at 150 megs with 20 megahertz bandwidth, you can go up to 40 and get 300 out of them. They make a 1 gig link that you can buy. Cost me $200 for the pair. So you're talking $100 each side. That's a really inexpensive way to get a link from one side to the other. And I think there's real benefit in that because if you want to get out to your garage, you want to get out to your shed, you want to connect to a neighbor's house, you have a collection of people, you live in a small community. My brother-in-law lives out in the middle of nowhere. The ability to talk wirelessly from one place to another with a $100 radio is amazing. The ability to push 150 megs through that is amazing. So the cost droppings there, I think, is noteworthy. And the last thing is the access camera that went up on the shed. So the specific model I don't have in front of me, but a couple of things. So again, going back to easier if you're able to troubleshoot or do the things on the ground. I found myself having to reset that camera while mounted on a shed. I implore you in the strongest possible terms, don't do it that way. Get the camera configured, all of that on the ground, get everything working so that all you have to do is crawl up there and plug it in and then crawl up there and plug it in. Don't try to short it. And I think part of it was, we had a number of different people working on it. And so there wasn't a prescribed order in which we were doing things. It was whoever was available was doing whatever part of the thing that you could get done in that moment. But hindsight being 2020, if I had it to do over again, I would do it slightly differently. And that would be it. I would configure all those devices ahead of time, and then I would crawl up there and plug it in. The end result, though, we're drawing more watts from the sun and putting them into the battery than we are drawing back out for the nano beam, the switch, and the camera. I think all in all, it's using about 18 watts. The changes that I'm making to the system, or the thing that will be changing, is that because that built-in switch is just defunco, and I'm not really sure exactly why, it's getting replaced with a different switch. And the switch that it's getting replaced with is really it's an Amazon. It was an industrial 24 volt switch. And the thing that appealed to me about it is that it will take anywhere from 12 to 24 volts. So it seems to me it's a nice middle ground for having a dedicated device that will do the thing. And where I think it's going to help me out a little bit more than the solar point did is even if other things don't work, Star Route is the name of it. Star Route Industrial 24 volt, 5 volt PoE switch. It's DIN mountable, which is going to be nice because I may end up putting a DIN rail in there, and I'll throw a link for this in the show notes as well so you can have it. But the thing that really stood out to me, and the reason that I wanted to do it, is because in the end, then the network part of it is a separate part from the solar part. We'll probably hang on to the solar point. There, Atypical had some suggestions for different solar controllers, so I may look into those. But really, from a solar controller standpoint, other than not exposing the metrics, we'll circle back to in a second here, I think it actually does a really good job at that. It's just all of the other stuff. I don't think it's a great access point. I don't think it's a particularly good switch. So this will give us the ability to have a network that's built inside the shed, and then the solar is just the power portion of it. The network portion of it is completely separate. The thing I wanted to circle around to with the metrics, I think there is more value than we sometimes give credit to in exposing metrics. And I don't know that I would have necessarily arrived at that conclusion on my own, except for when I look at what, Steve, you're doing with your end-phase system, and I went to see if I could do something similar with the solar point, and then I found myself kind of disappointed. I was like, oh, well, there's not really a way to do that. Can you briefly recap what you're doing to bring that data into Home Assistant and analyze it so you can keep a real-time log running of what's happening in your house? That you could conveniently export into a screenshot when I say, hey, Steve, how's your solar setup? Well, here, let me show you.
So Enphase specifically has a local API. It is, unfortunately, it is tied to the cloud insofar as you have to generate an API key from their website and renew it once a year, I believe it is. But the API itself works locally. So Home Assistant, basically you generate your dev API key and then you plug that into Home Assistant, and then all of the data flows into Home Assistant. So I store it in InfluxDB, but it doesn't really matter. One of the interesting side effects of this is I learned that my wife is a bit of a data nerd. So previous to just having conversations about doing something during a certain time of day to keep in line with the solar, or, you know, hey, it would cost us less money if you did it at this time, those kind of bounced off the surface. But then when she can actually visualize, like, you can see a nice arc of the time of day that the sun is the highest in the sky versus the amount that you're using versus the amount that's charging in the battery. And she's actually gone in there and, you know, specifically because she can see it, she goes to the time of day and says, oh, well, I can run the dryer at, 11 in the morning instead of running it at night before we go to bed because, we're generating more power than what we use. And it's kind of interesting because I listened to the, we'll call it the add-on phenomenon, where she'll tell her or her friends or whatever, and they have, like, they genuinely have a conversation about that. And that wouldn't have happened except that she can see some of those metrics. And so she likes, it's an adjacent thing, but I've plugged Home Assistant and Frigate in together. And what I mean by that is, so the cameras that I have will do the detection of motion. And because Home Assistant is detecting, like, essentially the cameras are feeding back into Home Assistant, I've seen an event. I've turned that function off in Frigate because Frigate was triggering on everything. It was actually even triggering on the fact that, like, the date time was changing on the screen, like in the frame. Now I know you can go in and, like, make it so that it has specific zones that it watches and stuff like that, but I don't want to exclude the zone where the time is changing. I just found that I didn't like what Frigate was doing, and because it essentially was meaning that my timeline was just all red, and red indicates, like, when you've had a motion event. So getting back to, like, tying this all in together with the solar and the cameras and stuff like that, Home Assistant will be able to understand that there's been an event the camera has seen, and it pushes that event into Frigate and says, hey, you've got an event at this time period. And so then, because I'm doing that via the API, it generates a little GIF of about 5 seconds of when that occurs, and she can go to the timeline or click on the GIFs in the Frigate panel and jump to that. And that has been an interesting thing to see. So she's ending up using these data points of, like, well, there's an event here, or we've got this amount of power coming in, or she really likes to see things of, like, what's using what power or what sort of things are active at a given time. It's been really interesting to see the unlocking of, she doesn't care about Home Assistant in and of itself, but the end result of it, if it is exposed in the right way, and I think this goes back to what you're talking about, if you can expose the things that you're doing with the solar point in a way that is meaningful to the people, they become more conscious of it, and it somewhat gamifies it, I guess.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It becomes so. Here's the thing. Even so, again, would it be awesome if it could be exposed and then you could, everybody that logs into Home Assistant could see the information rather than having to give them direct access to the thing? Yeah, that would be awesome because they can, you could potentially turn the wrong thing off and you shut the power off to the nano beam and then we're all hosed. So it wouldn't really be ideal to give them logins to the solar point. So it would be nice if it was external. But even with what they give you inside of the web UI, it was enough that within a day or two I could look and go, hey, it's producing 50, 60 watts of energy. Hey, we're only drawing 18. This is wonderful. And then it even does the calculation and it'll say, based on these conditions, and then you put in your zip code and it will try to anticipate what the forecast is. And it'll say, for the next 7 days, you can sustain this. There's no problems here. You're drawing less than is forecasted to be out there. And I haven't seen this happen, but I presume if, they forecast clouds, then it'll come in and say, hey, you might be running out of problem, but you can input things like the amount of battery that's there. And so even with what they do give you, to your point about gamification, it becomes is there more green or more red? Oh, there's more green. Wonderful. We're going to be awesome. If there was more red, we would be worrying. And so it makes it very easy for you to comprehend. When I was a kid and I was doing stuff like this, or I was beginning to play with this stuff, and back then it's, you're doing things like pulling the little tiny solar thing out of a calculator. So it's, much different scale, but you had to guess like, hey, work 2 days and then it died or whatever. There was, or you're measuring voltage or those sorts of things. You're measuring voltage drop and you're trying to anticipate or guess. So it's much nicer when there's a system, baked around it that allows you to do that.
It is, and it also encourages you to kind of do other things. I think it spreads out, right? And I think that people who get really interested in the metrics end up getting interested in things that they don't necessarily care about the thing itself, but rather the metrics around it. So you'll see people get interested in just being able to watch, like, oh, well, let's say I've got my solar bill. I've gotten some solar panels doing something and it's now pulling some sort of load. And so then they start tracking, even though it's inconsequential, well, how much money am I saving from this? Or, whatever it is. And even if it's like $2 a month and the next time it's $2.30, like they're still watching it because it's kind of interesting. And so I think that people's innate interest in progression, I would say. I think the idea that everybody wants to progress in some fashion is built into all humans, and it expresses itself in metrics or otherwise in ways that you wouldn't necessarily predict.
Yeah, because I'm winning. What are you winning? I don't know. The solar is getting more solars than it's dissipating. It's great.
Exactly.
So I'm winning. So to help kind of flesh this out a little bit, I want to invite Tiny in. Tiny, can you, for somebody who isn't familiar, can you tell me what Victoria Metrics is?
Yeah, so Victoria Metrics is an open source time series database that is not very picky about how you get data into it, and it's performant at small scales, and it scales up all the way to billions of active time series a second. So if let's say I replace the solar point with something that gives me API access to data, you actually found a GitHub project called Unpolar, which collects all Unify control and site device data. So we might be able to pull that thing off. I don't think so. Here I'm skeptical because Unify tends to draw a line between their typical Unify products and then their WISP stuff. I think it's UNMS or something like that. And they're different. They run on different systems. They run on different controllers, that sort of thing. So I wonder if it would work. But if it did, I would be able to pull that into Victoria Metrics. And then what would I be able to do? So you'd be able to visualize data. So rather than have to log into UNMS or the Unify controller, you can use the same user interface to troubleshoot issues with your Unify, as your cameras, as your Linux infrastructure. I call it the 20 tabs problem, where during an incident or when something's broken, you have like one tab open to see if the camera system's up, one tab open to see if your infrastructure is working, and it can be very confusing. And you can plug Victoria Metrics in to a data visualization tool like Grafana or Perses, and it will kind of put all the information you need to fix a problem in one spot. And if you're working in a team, it can get everybody singing off of the same sheet of music, because if the network people's data is in the same place as the infrastructure people, as the security people, they can all understand the problem the same way rather than having their own silos of information.
Why Victoria Metrics over other open source metric system? And I ask you that being a guy who nerded out with Victoria Metrics for a long time.
Yeah, so I am employed by Victoria Metrics, but I was evangelist long before I was an employee. Victoria Metrics is going to be the most performant, whether you're at a small scale or you're in the billions of active time series. The other nice thing is that it's very easy to get data into. So if you use InfluxDB, you have to use the Influx format. If you're in Prometheus, you have a couple of options because they support open telemetry and a couple of different ways of getting data in Prometheus format. But Victoria Metrics supports all of those, or there's JSON and CSV endpoints, CSV import endpoints as well.
Steve, your thoughts on the, would your wife use something like Victoria Metrics? Would she log into something like that if it was in a separate place to go get the data? Like if you put a carrot at the end of the stick to say, here's how you would see this thing, or here's how you would get to that thing, does that work, or do you have to integrate the metrics into some place she's already looking?
That's a tough question. So first of all, I probably wouldn't send her directly to Victoria Metrics. I probably would standardize on something like Grafana. So even if I was using Victoria Metrics as the metrics provider, and both Victoria Metrics and Prometheus can do their own graphing and stuff like that, I probably still would centralize on Grafana. That would make my life a little bit easier. And honestly, I already have Grafana built into Home Assistant, and so then that smooths the path even further for me.
So I guess, let me say something back and then you both tell me if this is accurate. Victoria Metrics is to Prometheus. Those would be a one-to-one analog, and then you would stack Grafana up on top of it to then display pretty graphs of the information that Victoria Metrics collects. Is that accurate?
That is 100% correct. You could actually use Victoria Metrics as a Prometheus data source in Grafana.
Interesting.
Because they speak the same language.
Can you talk a little bit about the ability to get data from all of the different places? I know when you and I were going kind of point for point on Prometheus versus Victoria Metrics, your point was essentially look at all the different ways I can get a hold of data. And that's one of the things that drew you to Victoria Metrics.
Yeah. So before I was using Victoria Metrics, I was using InfluxDB, but I was running into some querying issues and some performance issues. And the nice thing about Victoria Metrics was I could keep using Telegraph in my existing ingest pipeline, but I got a much better and more performant query interface on top of it. And that's how I ended up there. And I actually hear customers talk about that too, how they were using Graphi, Influx, whatever. And then they switched to Victoria Metrics, and their ingest migration was just changing a URL basically.
What's the easiest place, or where's the good resource for people if they want to get started with Victoria Metrics? They've never heard of it before, but they want to give it a whirl.
Yep. So if you want to learn more about Victoria Metrics, victoriametrics.com. If you want to get started with Victoria Metrics, docs.victoriametrics.com. And we have quick starts for Kubernetes, single binaries, Docker, you name it.
Tiny, I appreciate the time. We'll get you back on the show soon. So my solar adventures this week circle back to something I brought up on episode 424. You can get that by going to podcast.asknoahshow/424, podcast.asknoahshow.com/424. And in there, I talked about my desire to live off of a 12-volt battery. So I was trying to see how far I can get my own energy consumption down. And Steve and I, right before the show, kind of got into an impromptu discussion about sustainability. And so I think, Steve, this might take a bit of dark radio magic to get all this to tie together, but I think I am seeing a parallel in my life between my ability to reproduce power by way of a battery, an outlet, a 12-volt power source, and a car, a generator. It doesn't matter. There is a standard way by which I can deliver power to my laptop, and I feel like I've cracked that nut. At the same time, once I have power to said laptop, there is a level of reproducibility that comes by way of I can either install Arch and run an Ansible playbook to deliver all the software and make all the configuration changes requisite for me to use the computer, or lately I can use NixOS. Now, I'm still sharpening the sword with NixOS, so I stubbed my toe a couple of times this week, but I'm getting there. I haven't bailed yet. I'm getting there. In any event, and regardless of which path you choose to get there, what I wind up with is a computer that has a particular configuration and a particular software stack that allows me to do a particular thing. And never more was that clear than a few months ago when the power went out and I was able to continue watching the TV show I was watching because the media was reproducible, the computer was reproducible, the power was reproducible, everything was reproducible. And I guess I'm looking for a sanity check from you, either for you to say, yeah, Noah, you are on a sustainability minimalist kick, and I think you're treading down the right path and keep at it, kid. Or, yeah, you're blind and you're missing something, and this is why I installed 56,000 watts of power into my house, because it's not practical to do that off of a tiny little 12-volt battery and a 100-watt inverter. You're kidding yourself.
Well, I don't really know how to speak to the minimalism. That's something that's kind of personal to everybody, and there are some people that would think that I'm pretty minimalist to the extreme, and there are other people that go significantly further than where I go. Mm-hmm. So I don't know about that, but I think that your journey towards sustainability has been kind of paralleled with mine. I think I might have started a little bit ahead of you, and we take kind of different winding roads to get there. But it's been definitely a journey that you've been taking interesting detours down that I would not have considered. And I thought that's kind of an interesting way to go about the same process.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I struggle with it a little bit. It has manifested itself in some cool ways. So, for example, there was a power outage it was at a church, and they had 3-phase power, and one of the phases went out. So it had interesting little weird challenges, like the access control. The reader didn't have power because it was powered from the switch via PoE. But the magnets or the strikes or whatever the locking mechanism was, that absolutely had power because it was powered from the other side of the building. And so it was this weird thing where you couldn't swipe the key to open it, but there was power to the magnets. And so it was my experience in minimalism or trudging this path was useful insofar as I was able to pull a little 12-volt battery out and go, hey, all this stuff runs on 12-volt. Hey, I carry 12-volt with me. This is no problem. And I got my little lantern, and I got my screwdriver, and I got my little Anderson power poles, and I started connecting bits to bobs, and all of a sudden, before you knew it, one thing was open, the next thing was open, and I broke into, turns out you can override just about any access control with a can of air turned upside down, a 12-volt battery, and a couple of power leads. Ask me how I know that. The music in our ears means we're out of time. I thank you for joining us. The show is live every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. You can join us live at AskNoahShow.com or live.minddripmedia.com. That live stream, it continues 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The internet radio robots do not stop. You can stream them all the time at minddrip1.com. I'm at noahc.us. You can follow me there, find out where to listen and the schedule for all the things. We're back next week at 6 p.m. Central. AskNoahShow.com.